Did you know that the legendary Roman gladiators, those fierce warriors of the arena, immortalized in movies and myths, originally had nothing to do with entertainment at all? Before the spectacle, before the fame, before the Colosseum even existed, these iconic fighters began as a quiet, solemn part of funeral ceremonies. Their swords once served the dead, not the crowd. Welcome to Sleep is Overrated, where we explore the slower, softer, stranger side of history, designed to help you relax, reflect, and maybe even drift into restful sleep. Tonight's story is not about adrenaline or action. It's about the slow rise of power, the quiet beginnings of a brutal tradition, the real story behind the Roman gladiators. So settle in. Let your eyes grow heavy. Breathe deeply, and prepare for a journey into the ancient world, one step, one whisper, one forgotten truth at a time. Let's go back more than 2,500 years. Not to Rome at its peak, but to its ancestors, the Etruscans, a mysterious and often overlooked civilization in central Italy. Their beliefs about life, death, and the afterlife were deep and symbolic. They believed that blood carried spiritual power, that to send a soul into the next world, you must accompany it with courage, combat, and sacrifice. At early funerals, two men would fight, not for glory, not for prizes, but to mark the passage from one world to the next. These were sacred duels. The participants were often slaves, but their role was viewed as vital. Their blood fed the afterlife. Their pain was a final gift to the departed. It was a ritual, not a performance. There were no stadiums, no announcers, no tickets or vendors, just mourners, silence, and sand. A soft wind might carry the sounds of a clash. And then, stillness. The fallen would be honored, the living remembered, and the soul believed to be freed. These early combatants were not called gladiators yet, but this was their origin story, a story rooted in grief and spirituality. As generations passed, these sacred rites began to shift. Rome grew from a small city into a dominant republic, and with power came pride and politics. By the 3rd century BCE, the Romans had begun absorbing Etruscan customs into their own culture. But in typical Roman fashion, they didn't just adopt them. They expanded them, elevated them, transformed them. What was once quiet and sacred became public and loud. The funeral combat became a spectacle, a chance for families, especially wealthy ones, to show their devotion to the deceased and their influence over the living. They invited neighbors, then clients, then entire neighborhoods. Before long, what had once been a symbolic farewell became a ticketed event. The first recorded Roman gladiator show took place in 264 BCE, at the funeral of a nobleman named Junius Brutus. His sons hosted the event, and 3 pairs of fighters were made to duel. The crowd was small, but the idea was planted. Blood drew attention. Combat created loyalty. Death inspired awe. Soon, other families followed. Gladiator fights, or munera, became popular tools of prestige. They were offerings, originally to the dead, but increasingly to the Roman people. By the 2nd century BCE, these funeral games had moved from private courtyards into public spaces. Temporary wooden arenas were built. Programs were announced. Fighters were advertised. And the word gladiator, from gladius, meaning sword, entered everyday speech. Still, these early games were nothing like what they would become. They weren't daily events. They weren't centralized. But they planted seeds. The Romans, so practical and political, realized something powerful. Spectacle unites. Spectacle distracts. Spectacle controls. And so the games continued to grow. But they grew slowly, step by step, decade by decade. just like the Republic itself. And as they did, new roles emerged: the lanista, the manager of gladiators; the ludus, or training school; the editor, or sponsor of the games. Every piece of a future empire of entertainment began to click into place. Yet even as the crowds grew, some traditions remained. Families still hosted fights in honor of loved ones. A strange duality existed: bloodshed as both mourning and mass appeal. Sacred pain mixed with civic pride. The Republic's leaders noticed. The more people watched, the more people listened. And when the people listened, they voted. Gladiator games weren't just spectacles, they were political tools. And so, as you lie back, letting your thoughts soften and your body unwind, remember this. The origin of the gladiator wasn't about entertainment. It wasn't about glory. It was about belief, twisted, stretched, and repurposed over time. From sacred rite to deadly show. From family mourning to state control. And it all began quietly, as many powerful things do. Now breathe deeply. Let the dust of ancient Rome settle around your thoughts. The crowd hasn't yet gathered. The Colosseum is still centuries away. For now, there is only the whisper of the past. And that whisper will guide us further, into the Republic, into the blood rituals, into the minds of the first Romans who realized that power could be built on sand, steel, and silence. This is just the beginning. As the Roman Republic expanded, so too did its ambitions, and its appetite for control through spectacle. By the 2nd century BCE, the once modest funerary duels had become major public events. The city of Rome was growing rapidly, both in size and complexity. Its leaders faced an ever-increasing challenge: how to unify a restless, diverse population through culture, identity, and distraction. The answer: ritualized violence, refined, scheduled, and marketed as public service. In the early Republic, political power was concentrated in the hands of patricians, elite families who claimed ancestral ties to the founders of Rome. For these families, wealth was expected, but status had to be performed. Enter the Mun era, funeral games that became campaign advertisements. A senator seeking office might host a gladiator match in honor of his grandfather. A rival might upstage him with 10 duels instead of 5. Soon, competitions extended beyond the arena. Who could sponsor the largest show? The most exotic fighters? The bloodiest combat? And the people, citizens, freedmen, even slaves, were all invited. The Republic faced increasing internal tension. Slavery was expanding. The divide between rich and poor was growing. Urban crowds were volatile. And Rome's leaders knew one thing: keep them entertained, and they won't revolt. The poet Juvenal would later write, "Give them bread and circuses." It was cynical, but true. Gladiator games weren't just fun. They were pressure valves. A hungry man might riot, but a fed man with front row seats to a death match, he'd cheer. And so the shows grew bloodier, more elaborate, more scheduled. By the time of Augustus, Rome hosted 175 days of games per year. That's nearly one event every 2 days. And with the rise of the empire, things would only accelerate. But let's not rush. Before the emperors took the stage, before the Colosseum towered over the city, there was still a republic. Still senators vying for favor, still families putting fighters in chains, still crowds deciding who lived and who died. And all of it was perfectly normal, because Rome was no longer remembering the dead. It was managing the living. The gladiator had become a tool, not of ritual, but of control. And with every clash of steel, every drop of blood, Rome reminded its citizens of their place. Power belonged to the few, but the illusion of power, that belonged to everyone. So sleep now, knowing this, the roots of empire are rarely forged in grand declarations. More often, they're built in cheers, in rituals, in repetition. And as the sun sets on the Republic, we move closer to the true age of the arena, where glory, blood, and propaganda would combine into a new kind of empire. An empire of entertainment. Next, we'll walk softly into the reign of Augustus, the first emperor, and the birth of the Colosseum dream. But first, rest. Let the sounds of the crowd fade. Let the sand settle. And know that even in ancient Rome, distraction was a tool, and those who mastered it ruled. We're drifting back now, back through centuries, to a time before the great Colosseum, before the roar of Roman crowds, back to quiet hillsides in ancient Etruria, where the custom began not as entertainment, but as something sacred. Picture yourself walking through an ancient cemetery at dusk. The Etruscans, those mysterious people who came before Rome's greatness, believed that bloodshed at a funeral would nourish the spirit of the deceased. It wasn't about excitement or sport. It was about love, about honoring the dead. Imagine the scene. A wealthy Etruscan family has lost their patriarch. They gather in a clearing among the cypress trees, where slaves or prisoners are given weapons, not for spectacle, but for ceremony. The fighting is brief, solemn, witnessed by family members who believe they're helping their loved one's spirit find peace in the afterlife. The blood seeps into the earth slowly, mixing with fallen leaves, becoming part of the eternal cycle. From these quiet, sacred beginnings, something larger would grow, but we're in no hurry to get there. Rest in this moment, in this understanding that what would become grand entertainment began as something intimate, personal, spiritual. The Campanians, neighbors to the early Romans, adopted this practice, refined it, made it slightly more elaborate. Still small, still personal, still tied to death and remembrance. Picture small gatherings, maybe a dozen people, watching two men fight with simple weapons while musicians play soft, mournful songs. Why did death entertain? Perhaps because it made life feel more precious. Perhaps because witnessing controlled violence helped people process their own mortality. Perhaps because in a world where death came suddenly and often, there was comfort in making it into ritual, into something humans could control and contain. Let these thoughts drift through your mind like smoke from an ancient altar. No need to grasp them tightly. Just let them flow. As the Roman Republic gave way to empire, a new chapter opened in the story of gladiators and bloodsport. A chapter marked by monumental change, imperial ambition, and the dawn of one of the most iconic symbols in history, the Colosseum. But this transformation was not sudden or simple. It unfolded over decades, shaped by political cunning, architectural genius, and the evolving desires of Rome's citizens. Tonight, we'll explore how Augustus, Rome's first emperor, laid the groundwork for a new kind of spectacle, one that was as much about power and propaganda as it was about combat and carnage. Augustus, the architect of empire and spectacle. Now we're drifting forward in time, gently, like a leaf carried by a slow river. We're entering the Roman Republic, where the gladiator games are beginning to change, to grow beyond their funeral origins. Picture yourself in early Rome, not yet the marble marvel of the empire, but a city of brick and wood, where ambitious men compete for influence and power. The air smells of bread baking, of leather and metal from workshops, of the Tiber River flowing lazily nearby. Roman culture prized strength, discipline, courage, values forged in centuries of warfare. When Romans saw gladiators fight, they saw reflections of their own ideals. The arena became a mirror for Roman masculinity, a place where virtues could be displayed and tested. Wealthy patricians began hosting these games not just for funerals, but for political advantage. Imagine a Roman senator, perhaps named Marcus, planning his gladiator show. He walks through his villa at dawn, thinking about which fighters to purchase, how many pairs should fight, what it will cost him, and how many votes it might earn him. The Mun era, the gladiator shows, slowly evolved from sacred duty to social obligation to political tool. Each transformation happened gradually, like the way a river slowly carves a new channel through stone. Picture the early venues, not yet grand amphitheaters, but simple wooden platforms erected in the Forum Romanum. The crowd sits on temporary benches, maybe a few hundred people, watching two men circle each other with sword and shield. The atmosphere is intense but intimate, like watching a skilled craftsman work. You can almost hear the soft scrape of sandals on sand, the whispered conversations of spectators, the occasional ring of metal on metal. These are the sounds of tradition slowly transforming into something new. Let yourself drift deeper into this ancient afternoon, feeling the warm sun on your face, the gentle bustle of a city going about its daily business while occasionally pausing to watch death dance with life. Born Gaius Octavius Thurinus, but known to history simply as Augustus, he rose from the chaos of civil war to become Rome's unchallenged ruler. With Julius Caesar's assassination leaving a power vacuum, Augustus knew that stability meant control, and control meant winning the hearts and minds of Rome's millions. Part of his strategy was to harness the power of public games, those blood-soaked rituals that had evolved from funerary rites into political theatre. But Augustus had a vision. He wanted to elevate these games beyond mere violence. They would become a cornerstone of Roman identity, a grand civic religion where the people could witness Rome's greatness on full display. Under his reign, gladiatorial games expanded massively. The frequency increased, the venues grew larger, and the stakes rose higher. But Augustus didn't just want more games. He wanted spectacle, a spectacle that unified, dazzled, and reminded every Roman citizen of their place in the empire. The shift from Republic to Empire's public games. During the Republic, gladiator games had been tools for politicians to curry favor, but Augustus transformed them into instruments of imperial propaganda. The games were no longer just political bribes, they were state-sponsored celebrations of power and peace, what Augustus called the Pax Romana. He used the games to symbolize a new era, one where Rome was stable, prosperous, and dominant. In his words, "I found Rome a city of bricks, I leave it a city of marble." This statement applied not only to buildings but to culture, including the games. The games under Augustus became festivals of Roman values: discipline, courage, sacrifice, and unity. Gladiators were cast not just as fighters, but as embodiments of these ideals. The emperor's generosity was demonstrated by lavish spectacles, often free to the public, an early example of bread and circuses designed to keep the populace content. The rise of the amphitheater. One of Augustus' greatest contributions to the gladiatorial tradition was the move toward permanent arenas, stone amphitheaters that could house tens of thousands of spectators. Previously, games were held in temporary wooden structures or open fields. These venues were prone to fire, decay, and limited capacity. Augustus initiated the construction of Rome's first stone amphitheater, the Amphitheatrum Gladiatorii, a symbol of permanence and imperial grandeur. These amphitheaters allowed for better organization, more complex events, and larger crowds. The architecture itself was designed to impress. Tiers of seats rose in perfect symmetry, archways allowed for grand entrances, and carefully engineered passages moved gladiators, animals, and stage props with ease. The political power of spectacle. By institutionalizing gladiator games and building permanent venues, Augustus gave Rome a powerful tool to shape public opinion and consolidate power. The games served multiple political purposes. Distraction. The empire faced many challenges: uprisings, economic pressures, and threats at its borders. Gladiator games were a means to keep the public entertained and distracted from daily hardships. Unity. Rome was a sprawling empire with diverse peoples and cultures. Games provided a shared experience, a cultural glue that helped bind citizens to a common identity. Legitimization. The emperor's generosity in hosting games underscored his role as benefactor and protector. The spectacle reinforced the idea that the emperor was essential for peace and prosperity. The gladiator as a symbol. During Augustus' reign, the gladiator evolved from a brutal fighter to a complex symbol in Roman culture. While still slaves or prisoners of war, some gladiators gained celebrity status, and their lives were mythologized. Writers and poets began describing gladiators as tragic heroes, men caught between fate and glory, death and survival. Their battles were seen not only as entertainment, but as moral lessons in bravery and endurance. Merchants sold gladiator figurines. Children played with wooden swords imagining the arena. Graffiti appeared on city walls celebrating famous fighters. The emperor himself sometimes participated symbolically in the games, reinforcing the connection between ruler and spectacle. The path to the Colosseum. Augustus' reign set the stage, but the true monument to gladiatorial spectacle was yet to come. The Roman Colosseum, or Flavian Amphitheatre, was built decades later, beginning in AD 70 under Emperor Vespasian and completed by his son Titus. But its origins trace back to the traditions and ambitions established during Augustus' time. The Colosseum was more than an arena. It was a statement of imperial power, architectural innovation, and cultural dominance. With a capacity of up to 50,000 spectators, it allowed for unprecedented scale in gladiatorial combat, animal hunts, and mock naval battles. The cultural legacy of Augustus' games. Augustus' vision transformed gladiator games from private rituals into public spectacles that defined Roman culture for centuries. They became central to Roman life, a tool for emperors to communicate power, for citizens to express identity, and for society to enact complex social roles. The legacy of this era is still felt today, not only in the ruins of the Colosseum but in how we think about spectacle, entertainment, and power. Sleep now, as Rome's empire rises with the dawn. Let your breath slow and your mind drift through the echoes of the ancient crowd, the cheers, the sand, the clang of steel. The age of Augustus is the age of transformation, and the dream of the Colosseum is just beginning. Tomorrow, we will enter the stone walls of the Colosseum itself, witness the gladiators who defined an empire and the games that captivated the world. Rest now. The sands of time are vast, and our journey has only just begun. Now we're going to walk very slowly through an ancient armory. Picture yourself in the quiet storage rooms beneath an amphitheater, where weapons and armor wait in neat rows, each piece designed for a specific type of fighter. Here, hanging on wooden pegs, is the equipment of the murmillo. Run your eyes gently over the large rectangular shield, the gladiator sword, the distinctive helmet with its fish crest. The murmillo was named for the fish decoration, and they fought like the sea itself, patient, powerful, methodical. Next to it, the lighter gear of the Thrake's smaller shield, curved sword, protecting the legs with metal greaves. These fighters moved like dancers, quick and precise, their Thracian heritage evident in every piece of their equipment. And here, most unusual of all, the net and trident of the retiarius. Picture this fighter in your mind's eye, lightly armored, relying on speed and skill, casting his weighted net like a fisherman on the Mediterranean. When he caught an opponent, he would draw them in slowly, methodically, like landing a great fish. The Secuta's armor is designed specifically to fight the retiarius' smooth helmet so the net won't catch, heavy shield to ward off the trident. Picture these two in the arena. The chase, the careful circling, the net flying through the air like a living thing. Each gladiator type was carefully balanced against its traditional opponent, like pieces in an elaborate game of chess where each move was a matter of life and death. The Romans loved this balance, this careful choreography of violence. Imagine yourself as a spectator, watching these different fighting styles. The heavy, methodical clashes of two murmillos. The quick, darting movements of Thrake's fighters. The unique drama of net versus sword. Each match type had its own rhythm, its own appeal. The Romans saw something almost philosophical in these matchups. Strength against speed, tradition against innovation, patience against aggression. In their minds, the arena became a place where abstract concepts took physical form and battled for supremacy. Let these images drift through your consciousness like figures in a peaceful dream. No urgency, no startling violence. Just a quiet appreciation of ancient craftsmanship and human ingenuity. The Colosseum, one of the greatest monuments of the ancient world, standing for nearly 2 millennia as a symbol of Rome's might, culture, and power. But beneath its massive stone arches and towering walls lies a story far richer than mere stone and mortar. It's a story of visionary engineering, social spectacle, political power, and the complex human drama played out on its blood-soaked sands. The construction of the Colosseum began in AD 70 under Emperor Vespasian, a man who rose from the turmoil of civil war to found the Flavian dynasty and restore order to a fractured empire. The site chosen was charged with symbolism, a former lake in Nero's vast Domus Aurea Palace, reclaimed from imperial excess and returned to the people of Rome. This act alone declared the Colosseum's purpose, not just an arena for combat, but a grand public space meant to unify, entertain, and impress. Built from travertine limestone, tuff, and the revolutionary Roman concrete, the Colosseum's elliptical shape measured about 620 by 513 feet and rose 4 stories high. It could hold between 50,000 and 80,000 spectators, a staggering capacity that showcased Rome's architectural and logistical prowess. The outer walls, adorned with a series of arches framed by classical columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, reflected a deep respect for tradition and aesthetic harmony. Inside, the seating was meticulously organized by social class. The elite senators and dignitaries sat closest to the arena on the podium, while the ordinary citizens and women filled the upper tiers. The entire structure was designed for efficiency and safety, with 80 entrances allowing crowds to enter and exit in a matter of minutes, a feat of crowd control that rivals modern stadiums. Beneath the arena floor lay the Hypogeum, a sprawling underground complex of tunnels, cages, and chambers. Here, gladiators prepared for battle, wild animals were held captive, and ingenious stage machinery operated. Pulley systems, trapdoors, and elevators allowed fighters and beasts to appear suddenly, transforming the arena into a place of surprise and drama. This subterranean network was a marvel of engineering, adding layers of complexity to the spectacle above. The arena itself was covered with wooden planks and a thick layer of sand, chosen to absorb blood and provide footing for the combatants. But the Colosseum's purpose extended far beyond gladiatorial fights. It was a versatile stage for a variety of public spectacles. Venations or wild beast hunts brought lions, tigers, and elephants from across the empire. Public executions were sometimes staged as mythological reenactments, and on rare occasions, the arena was flooded for mock naval battles, though such events required elaborate preparations and were exceptional. The Colosseum was the ultimate theater of power. The emperor watched from his special box, the pulvina, a reminder to all of the ultimate authority over life and death. The crowds, with their cheers, gasps, and jeers, were part of the performance, a collective audience and participant in a ritual that reinforced social order and imperial control. Gladiators themselves were complex figures, often slaves or prisoners of war, yet sometimes volunteers drawn by fame and fortune. Their diverse fighting styles, the heavily armored Murmillo, the nimble retiarius wielding nets and tridents, the relentless Secutor, created a dynamic spectacle. Their fights blended skill, endurance, and theatricality, turning brutal combat into a form of storytelling. The Colosseum endured centuries of change, damage, and neglect. Earthquakes, stone quarrying, and the passage of time reduced it to a ruin, yet its symbolic power never waned. Today, it remains a potent reminder of ancient Rome's grandeur and complexity, a monument to human creativity, cruelty, and the eternal desire for spectacle. Breathe in the echoes of the crowd, the clang of weapons, the roar of wild beasts, and the silent prayers of those who faced the sands. This was a place where history was made, where power was displayed in stone and blood, and where the drama of empire played out under an open sky. Now, as your breath slows and your mind drifts through the timeless arches, allow yourself to rest. The Colosseum story is vast, layered, and eternal, woven into the very fabric of Rome and the echoes of civilization itself. Let the night carry you deeper into history, where stone meets story and legend meets truth. We're walking now through the early morning quiet of an ancient gladiator school. The Ludus Magnus, the most famous training ground, connected to the Colosseum by an underground tunnel. But in this peaceful moment, it's just awakening to another day. Picture yourself in the central courtyard as dawn breaks. The sand is raked smooth, unmarked by the day's training yet to come. Stone columns support covered walkways where gladiators will soon emerge from their cells, but for now, everything is still. The lanista, the trainer and owner, is already awake, planning the day's exercises. He walks quietly through the sleeping quarters, checking on his investments, his fighters. This is his world, his responsibility. Each gladiator represents years of training, significant expense, careful cultivation of skill. Imagine the daily routine unfolding slowly. First, the morning meal, barley porridge, beans, dried fruit. Simple food, but nutritious. The gladiators eat in contemplative silence, knowing that this fuel will carry them through hours of demanding training. Then to the practice arena. But this isn't brutal or chaotic. This is methodical, almost meditative. New fighters work with wooden swords against practice posts, learning basic strikes, building muscle memory. The sound of wood on wood creates a gentle rhythm, like distant drumming. More experienced fighters pair off for careful sparring. Every move observed by trainers, every technique refined. There's an unexpected camaraderie here. These men who might face each other in the arena also share meals, share quarters, share the unique understanding of their dangerous profession. Picture the bonds that form. Veterans teaching newcomers, sharing small comforts, creating a kind of family among people who live constantly with the possibility of death. There's poetry in this, the way humans create connection even in the most extreme circumstances. As evening falls, imagine the gladiators in their cells, some writing letters to family, some practicing quiet prayers, some simply sitting in contemplation. The stone walls hold their dreams, their fears, their acceptance of fate. Let yourself drift into this ancient rhythm. The cycle of training, eating, resting, preparing. A life lived intensely, moment by moment, without the luxury of assuming tomorrow. When you picture gladiators, your mind likely races to the spectacular clashes in the Colosseum, the roar of the crowd, and the deadly combat on the sandy arena floor. But what prepared these men for such brutal, high-stakes battles? The answer lies in the gladiator training schools, the ludi gladiatorii, institutions that shaped slaves, prisoners, and volunteers into the most formidable fighters of the ancient world. The origins and purpose of the ludi. The ludi gladiatorii were more than just training centers. They were institutions born from Rome's insatiable appetite for gladiatorial combat. The earliest games were brutal, often involving untrained prisoners thrown into the arena to fight or die. But as gladiatorial games became a key part of Roman culture and politics, the demand for skilled fighters soared. The solution: schools devoted to training gladiators, transforming raw recruits into polished performers capable of thrilling crowds and showcasing the power of Rome. These schools were often owned by wealthy elites or the imperial family, who used them not only to generate public favor but also as tools of control. Gladiators were valuable investments. Training them required resources, skill, and discipline. In return, successful gladiators brought fame, money, and political influence to their owners. Daily life inside the ludi. Life in a ludus was harsh, disciplined, and unforgiving. Gladiators lived within the school's walls, separated from the outside world by heavy gates and watchful guards. Their days began before dawn, often with grueling physical training. The air would fill with the clang of wooden swords, the thud of punches, and the strained breathing of men pushing their bodies to the limit. Gladiators were housed in cramped barracks, with little privacy or comfort. Food was plain but designed for strength and stamina, mostly barley, vegetables, and lean protein. Surprisingly, research shows they ate a diet rich in plant-based foods and drank a calcium-rich tonic made from wood ash and vinegar, believed to help bone strength and recovery. The trainers, known as doctors, were usually former gladiators or seasoned soldiers. They wielded authority with iron fists, pushing their pupils through strict drills and combat simulations. Disobedience or weakness was met with harsh punishment, flogging, deprivation, or worse. Specializations, fighting styles, and weapons training. Not all gladiators fought the same way. The ludi trained men in specialized combat styles, each with distinctive weapons, armor, and techniques. This variety kept the games fresh, exciting, and unpredictable, a crucial element in captivating the Roman audience. Murmillo, recognizable by their large rectangular shield, scutum, and broad helmet with a fish-shaped crest, Murmillos were heavily armored and wielded short swords called gladi. Their fighting style was methodical and defensive, relying on strength and shield tactics. Retiarius, lightly armored and agile, the retiarius fought with a trident and a weighted net, attempting to entangle their opponent before delivering a killing blow. Their minimal armor, often just an arm guard and shoulder pad, made them vulnerable but quick. Secutor, designed as the natural opponent to the retiarius, the secutor wore a smooth, rounded helmet with tiny eye holes to avoid entanglement by the net and carried a sword and large shield. Thrakes, inspired by Thracian warriors, they wielded a curved sword called a sickle and carried a small shield. Their helmet featured a griffin crest. Training in these styles was rigorous and highly specialized. Fighters spent hours mastering footwork, parrying, and weapon techniques. Trainers emphasized endurance and strategy as much as brute force. The role of discipline and punishment. The ludi were strict environments where discipline was paramount. Gladiators swore an oath of obedience to their lanista, the manager or owner of the school, committing to rigorous training and submission to commands. Punishments for insubordination or poor performance were swift and brutal. Floggings were common, and serious infractions could lead to imprisonment or execution. Despite this harshness, the schools also fostered a sense of camaraderie and brotherhood. Gladiators depended on one another for survival, in training, in combat, and in enduring the brutal realities of their lives. Some friendships and alliances forged in the ludi would last until their final battle. Psychological training, beyond physical strength. Survival in the arena demanded more than muscle and skill. It required mental toughness. Trainers worked to harden gladiators psychologically, teaching them to suppress fear, embrace pain, and maintain focus under extreme pressure. Some schools reportedly used psychological tactics to instill confidence and aggression, preparing fighters to perform not just as warriors, but as entertainers who embodied courage and strength for the cheering crowd. The gladiator's mindset was complex, part gladiator, part actor, part athlete. Their performance was as much about spectacle as survival. Costs, ownership, and social status. Gladiators were expensive investments. Owners spent money on training, food, armor, and medical care. Successful gladiators could earn rewards, fame, and sometimes freedom, but most remained slaves or prisoners with few rights. The rudis, a wooden sword awarded to victorious gladiators, symbolized freedom. Earning it meant release from the harsh life of the arena, but it was rare and hard won. Despite their low social status, popular gladiators could achieve celebrity. Crowds adored them, and some even influenced politics by swaying public opinion. Training schools across the empire. While Rome housed the largest ludi, training schools existed throughout the empire, in Gaul, Spain, North Africa, and beyond. Each region adapted techniques and styles based on local cultures and needs, adding to the diversity of gladiatorial combat. These schools helped spread Roman culture and control, reinforcing the empire's power through spectacle and military discipline. Legacy of the ludi gladiatorii. The gladiator training schools represent a unique fusion of brutal discipline, performance art, and ancient military training. They highlight the complex nature of Roman society, where entertainment, politics, and violence intertwined. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine the endless drills, the echo of wooden swords clashing, the sweat and blood mixed on stone floors, and the silent prayers of men fighting not only for survival, but for honor, fame, and perhaps freedom. Welcome, weary traveler, to a journey through time itself. Tonight, we embark on an extraordinary voyage back to ancient Rome, where the legendary gladiators once walked the same earth beneath our feet. This is not just a story, but a meditation on courage, survival, and the complex tapestry of human civilization. Allow yourself to settle completely now. Find that perfect position where your body can truly let go. Feel the weight of the modern world lifting from your shoulders like morning mist rising from the 7 hills of Rome. Tonight, you are not bound by the constraints of time or space. You are free to drift, to float, to wander through the centuries as gently as a feather carried by ancient winds. We're going to take this journey very, very slowly, like archaeologists carefully brushing dust from precious artifacts, revealing layer after layer of human story. There will be no sudden battles to startle you, no dramatic clashes to disturb your peace. Instead, we'll walk together through the quiet corridors of history, listening to the whispered tales of those who lived and died in the arena. Close your eyes now and imagine that you're floating high above the Mediterranean Sea. The water below is the deepest blue, catching the golden light of a setting sun. You can see the ancient coastlines as they once were, untouched by modern development, dotted with small fishing villages and marble temples gleaming white against green hillsides. As we drift downward, slowly, gently, you begin to see the eternal city of Rome spread below you. Not the Rome of today, but Rome in its glory days, when aqueducts brought fresh water from distant mountains, when the Forum bustled with senators and merchants, when the great amphitheaters echoed with the roar of crowds gathered to witness spectacles that would echo through eternity. Feel yourself becoming lighter, more peaceful, as we descend through the layers of time. Each century we pass through brings new stories, new voices, new understanding of what it meant to be human in an age when life and death danced together in the arena's golden sand. Let your breathing slow naturally, following the rhythm of ancient temple chimes. In and out, like the gentle lapping of waves against marble harbors. In and out, like the soft footsteps of gladiators walking through torchlit corridors beneath the Colosseum. Your mind is becoming as receptive as fresh papyrus, ready to absorb the stories that have waited centuries to be told. Stories of courage and fear, of freedom and slavery, of the strange ways humans have always sought meaning in spectacle and struggle. Tonight, you are both witness and participant in one of history's most fascinating chapters. But you are safe, you are peaceful, you are protected by the gentle boundaries of dream and memory. The gladiators cannot harm you, they can only teach you, inspire you, and eventually, lull you into the deepest, most restful sleep you've experienced in ages. We're drifting back now through the mists of time, past the glory days of the Roman Empire, past the founding of Rome itself, to a time when the Italian peninsula was home to mysterious peoples whose names we barely remember. The Etruscans, the Ascans, the Campanians, peoples who left their mark on history in ways they never could have imagined. Picture yourself walking through an ancient Etruscan necropolis at twilight. The tombs are carved into gentle hillsides, their entranceways flanked by weathered stone lions and sacred symbols. This is where our story truly begins, not in the roar of the Colosseum, but in the whispered prayers of families honoring their beloved dead. The Etruscans believed that death was not an ending but a transformation, a passage from one state of being to another. To help their departed loved ones on this journey, they developed elaborate funeral rituals that included feasting, music, dancing, and yes, combat. But this was not combat as entertainment. This was combat as sacred offering, as spiritual nourishment for souls traveling to the afterlife. Imagine a wealthy Etruscan family gathering in 600 BCE to honor their patriarch, a man who had led their community with wisdom and courage for many decades. His tomb has been prepared with all the goods he'll need in the next world: pottery, jewelry, weapons, even his favorite wine cups. But his spirit needs more than material objects. It needs the life force that flows when blood is spilled in his honor. Picture the scene unfolding in the golden light of a Mediterranean sunset. Family members dressed in their finest robes, standing in a circle around a small arena marked by sacred stones. Musicians play soft, mournful melodies on lyres and flutes. The air is heavy with the scent of burning incense and olive oil torches. Two men enter the circle, perhaps prisoners of war, perhaps volunteers seeking honor, perhaps slaves who have been promised freedom if they survive. They are given simple weapons: short swords, small shields, basic armor. This is not about spectacle or skill, but about the sacred act of offering life to honor death. The combat is brief, ritualistic, almost choreographed. One man falls, his blood seeping into the earth, becoming part of the eternal cycle of life and death. The family believes this sacrifice will strengthen their ancestor's spirit, will help him find his way to the blessed afterlife, will ensure his protection of the living family from beyond the grave. But why did this particular form of honor take root so deeply in Italian culture? Perhaps because these were warrior peoples, who understood that the transition from life to death was itself a kind of battle. Perhaps because blood represented the essence of life, and spilling it was the ultimate gift one could offer to the gods or to the spirits of the dead. The Romans, those practical, ambitious people who would eventually absorb all the Italian tribes into their expanding empire, encountered these funeral games when they conquered Campania in the 4th century BCE. Roman soldiers, returning from campaigns, brought stories of these solemn combats, these sacred offerings of blood and skill. Picture a Roman senator, perhaps named Gaius Junius Brutus, walking through his villa in 264 BCE, planning the funeral games for his recently deceased father. He has heard of the Campanian custom, has seen how it honors the dead while also displaying the family's wealth and piety. He decides to hold such games in the Forum Boarium, the cattle market, where there is space for spectators and room for the sacred combat. This is the first recorded gladiator fight in Rome, not in a grand amphitheater, but in a simple marketplace, witnessed by perhaps a few hundred curious Romans. 3 pairs of fighters, simple weapons, basic ceremony. But something in the Roman spirit responded to this display of controlled violence, this combination of honor and spectacle, this dance of death performed in broad daylight. The Romans were a people shaped by constant warfare, by the need to expand or die, by the belief that strength and courage were the highest virtues. When they watched gladiators fight, they saw reflections of their own military values, their own struggles for survival and dominance. The arena became a mirror in which Romans could examine their own souls, their own relationship with death and glory. But the transformation from sacred ritual to public entertainment happened slowly, gradually, like water wearing away stone. Each generation of Romans added something new to the gladiator games. Better weapons, more elaborate armor, larger venues, more sophisticated rules. What began as a way to honor the dead became a way to honor the living, to gain political advantage, to display wealth and power. Picture yourself as a peaceful observer, watching this evolution unfold across the centuries. You see the simple Etruscan ceremonies giving way to more elaborate Roman festivals. You watch as the wooden platforms in the forum grow larger, as the crowds grow more demanding, as the fighters become more skilled and specialized. There's something both beautiful and troubling about this transformation. Beautiful because it shows human creativity, the way cultures adapt and evolve, the way meaning can be found in the most unlikely places. Troubling because it shows how easily the sacred can become secular, how quickly honor can become mere entertainment, how the line between respect and exploitation can blur beyond recognition. Let these images drift through your mind like smoke from ancient altars, the quiet Etruscan tombs, the sacred circles of combat, the gradual emergence of Roman spectacle. Feel the weight of centuries passing, the slow transformation of ritual into entertainment, the birth of something that would captivate the ancient world for centuries to come. Now we're moving forward through time, gently floating through the centuries like leaves carried by the Tiber River. We're entering the Roman Republic, that fascinating period when Rome was expanding its power across the Mediterranean, when ambitious men competed fiercely for political influence, when the gladiator games began their transformation from sacred ritual to political tool. Picture yourself in Rome around 200 BCE. The city is no longer the simple farming settlement it once was, but it's not yet the marble wonder it will become under the emperors. The buildings are mostly brick and timber, the streets are narrow and crowded, and the air is filled with the sounds of a growing metropolis, hammers ringing in workshops, merchants calling their wares, the constant murmur of conversation in a dozen different languages. The Roman Republic was built on competition between patricians and plebeians, between different political factions, between ambitious individuals seeking glory and power. Every Roman politician needed to find ways to distinguish himself from his rivals, to win the favor of the voting citizens, to make his name memorable in a city full of accomplished men. Hosting gladiator games became one of the most effective ways to achieve these goals. But it was expensive, complex, and risky. Picture a young Roman senator, perhaps named Marcus Aemilius Scaurus, walking through his villa at dawn, calculating the costs of the funeral games he's planning for his father. He needs to balance honor with affordability, spectacle with dignity, tradition with innovation. The games were still tied to funerals at this point. Roman law required that gladiator contests be held only in honor of the dead, not as mere entertainment. But clever politicians found ways to stretch this requirement, to hold elaborate funeral games for distant relatives, to make the most of every opportunity to display their wealth and generosity to the Roman people. Imagine the planning that went into these events. Marcus must hire a lanista, a gladiator trainer and dealer, to provide the fighters. He must arrange for weapons and armor, for medical care, for the temporary wooden amphitheater that will be erected in the forum. He must coordinate with the urban praetor to ensure the games don't conflict with other public events. He must hire musicians, announcers, even exotic animal handlers if he wants to include beast hunts. The logistics are staggering. Picture the lanista's compound outside Rome, where gladiators train and live. It's a world unto itself, with its own rules, its own hierarchy, its own strange mixture of brutality and brotherhood. The lanista, perhaps a former gladiator himself, must balance the need to train skilled fighters with the economic reality that dead gladiators represent lost investment. Watch as the gladiators prepare for Marcus's games. They rise before dawn, eat their simple breakfast of barley porridge and beans, then spend hours practicing with wooden swords against sturdy posts. The newer fighters work on basic techniques, how to hold a shield, how to move their feet, how to watch an opponent's eyes for signs of his next move. The veterans spar with each other, their movements fluid and precise, their bodies bearing the scars of countless battles. There's an unexpected camaraderie in these training sessions. These men who might face each other in the arena also share meals, share stories, share the unique understanding that comes from living constantly with the possibility of death. Some form genuine friendships, some become bitter rivals, some simply coexist in the professional manner of soldiers preparing for war. The Roman crowd's relationship with gladiators was complex and contradictory. They cheered for them as heroes, but despised them as slaves. They admired their skill and courage, but considered them morally contaminated by their profession. A successful gladiator might be more famous than a senator, but he still couldn't vote, couldn't marry a Roman citizen, couldn't own property in his own name. Picture yourself in the crowd at one of Marcus's games. You're sitting on a temporary wooden bench in the Forum Romanum, surrounded by citizens from every level of Roman society. The wealthy have cushions and parasols. The poor stand in the back. Everyone is talking, eating, placing bets on the outcomes of the fights. The first pair of gladiators enters the arena. They salute the sponsor of the games with the traditional phrase, Ave, Imperator, morituri te salutant. Hail, Commander, those who are about to die salute you. But this famous phrase, so dramatic in movies and novels, was actually used only once in recorded history, at a naval battle staged by Emperor Claudius. Most gladiator contests began with simpler greetings. Watch as the fighters circle each other. One is a heavily armed secutor, with a large rectangular shield and a short sword. The other is a retiarius, armed with a net, a trident, and a dagger. This is one of the classic matchups, a careful balance of equipment and fighting style designed to create interesting tactical possibilities. The retiarius tries to entangle the secutor with his net. The secutor advances steadily, using his shield to ward off the trident thrusts. The crowd holds its breath as the net flies through the air, misses, and the retiarius must retrieve it while dodging the secutor's attacks. This is chess played with flesh and steel, strategy made visible in movement and timing. The fight ends when the retiarius manages to entangle the secutor's legs. The crowd erupts in cheers and groans, depending on which fighter they favored. The defeated secutor raises his finger in appeal to the crowd, asking for mercy. The decision rests with the sponsor of the games, but he usually follows the crowd's wishes. Today, the secutor has fought bravely, and the crowd demands mercy with upturned thumbs and shouts of "Mit! Release him!" This is the reality of gladiator combat. Most fights didn't end in death. Professional gladiators were too valuable to waste casually. They were more like modern boxing matches, skilled athletes competing for victory, not execution. Death was always a possibility, but it was the exception rather than the rule. But the games were changing, evolving, growing more elaborate with each generation. What began as simple funeral honors were becoming major public spectacles. The temporary wooden amphitheaters were getting larger, the crowds were getting more sophisticated in their demands, and the politicians were finding new ways to use the games for their own advancement. Picture the slow transformation of Roman society. As the Republic expanded its power across the Mediterranean, as wealth flowed into Rome from conquered territories, as the city grew from a regional power to the center of a vast empire, the gladiator games grew alongside it. They became a mirror of Roman ambition, Roman wealth, Roman power, and Roman hunger for spectacle. Let these images of the Republic drift through your mind: the bustling forum, the temporary amphitheaters, the careful politics of sponsoring games, the gradual transformation of sacred ritual into public entertainment. Feel the slow passage of time, the gentle evolution of customs and traditions, the way human institutions adapt and change while maintaining their essential character. Now we're going to take a very long, peaceful walk through the armory beneath a great amphitheater. Picture yourself in these quiet storage chambers, where weapons and armor wait in neat rows, each piece crafted for a specific purpose, each combination of equipment designed to create a unique fighting style and tactical challenge. The lamplight flickers gently across polished metal and leather. The air smells of oil and bronze, of leather conditioner and sharpening stones. This is where the romance of the arena meets the reality of craftsmanship, where skilled artisans created the tools that would determine victory or defeat in the sand above. Let's begin with the murmillo, whose name comes from the Greek word for a type of fish. Picture his equipment laid out carefully on a wooden table. The large rectangular shield, the scutum, painted with bright designs and reinforced with bronze. The gladius, the short sword that was also the weapon of Roman legionaries, perfectly balanced for thrusting and cutting. The heavy helmet with its distinctive high crest, designed to look like a fish's dorsal fin. The murmillo's armor was about protection and endurance. He wore a manica, a padded and segmented arm guard, on his sword arm, and a single greave protecting his left leg. His fighting style was methodical, patient, defensive. He would advance steadily behind his large shield, waiting for opportunities to strike with his gladius, relying on superior armor and training to wear down his opponent. Picture a murmillo in the arena. He moves like a fortress walking, his shield positioned to cover his body, his sword held ready for quick thrusts. Against a lighter opponent, he advances relentlessly, forcing the fight, using his superior protection to absorb attacks while looking for openings. This is the style of the Roman legion made into entertainment: disciplined, methodical, inexorable. Next to the murmillo's gear, we find the equipment of the Thrax, the Thracian gladiator. His shield is smaller, curved, designed for mobility rather than absolute protection. His sword is curved as well, a sickle, based on the traditional weapon of the Thracian tribes. His armor includes high greaves on both legs and a distinctive helmet with a griffin crest. The Thrax fought like a dancer, quick, agile, using speed and skill to overcome heavier opponents. Picture him circling his enemy, looking for angles of attack, using his curved sword to hook around shield edges, relying on footwork and timing rather than brute force. This was the fighting style of the mountain peoples, adapted for the arena. Watch as a Thrax faces a murmillo. The murmillo advances steadily, shield up, sword ready. The Thrax dances around him, striking quickly and then retreating, looking for the perfect moment to slip past the larger shield. The contrast in styles creates natural drama: strength against speed, patience against aggression, Rome against the provinces. But perhaps the most unique of all gladiator types was the retiarius, the net fighter. His equipment is minimal but specialized: a weighted net about 10 feet in diameter, a trident with barbed prongs, a dagger for close combat, and a galerius, a shoulder guard with a high curved edge designed to deflect attacks from above. The retiarius wore no helmet, no armor on his torso. He relied entirely on mobility, on the reach of his trident, on the entangling power of his net. Picture him in combat, constantly moving, casting his net like a fisherman on the Mediterranean, using his trident to keep opponents at bay while looking for the perfect moment to entangle them. The traditional opponent for the retiarius was the secutor, the pursuer. The secutor's equipment was specifically designed to counter the net fighter's advantages. His helmet was smooth and rounded, with no projections that could catch the net. His shield was slightly smaller than the murmillo's, allowing for greater mobility. His armor was streamlined for pursuit. Picture the classic matchup between retiarius and secutor. The retiarius tries to maintain distance, using his trident's reach to keep the secutor at bay while looking for opportunities to cast his net. The secutor advances aggressively, trying to close the distance, using his shield to ward off trident thrusts and deflect the net when it comes flying toward him. The net flies through the air like a living thing. If it catches the secutor, he must cut himself free quickly or be drawn in by the trident. If it misses, the retiarius must retrieve it while dodging the secutor's attacks, or fight with just his trident and dagger. This is pure drama, the clash of completely different fighting philosophies, the battle between entanglement and escape. There were dozens of other gladiator types, each with its own equipment and fighting style. The provocator, who fought with gear similar to a Roman legionary. The hoplomachus, who used a spear and small shield like a Greek hoplite. The scissor, who fought with a weapon that looked like a curved blade attached to a mechanical arm. The equites, who began their fights on horseback before dismounting to continue on foot. Some gladiator types were ethnic in origin, based on the fighting styles of peoples Rome had conquered. The Gaul, with his long sword and oval shield. The Samnus, with his distinctive feathered helmet and rectangular shield. These matchups allowed Romans to refight their victories over foreign enemies, to see their military triumphs recreated as entertainment. Picture yourself watching a full day of games. You see the careful choreography of different fighting styles, the way each matchup creates its own tactical puzzle, its own dramatic possibilities. A day might begin with beast hunts, continue with executions of criminals, and climax with gladiator contests featuring different combinations of fighter types. The Romans loved the complexity of these matchups. They became connoisseurs of combat, able to appreciate the subtle differences between fighting styles, to recognize superior technique and tactical awareness. Betting on gladiator fights became as sophisticated as modern horse racing, with odds calculated based on fighters' records, their equipment, their physical condition, even the weather conditions that might affect their performance. But behind all this technical complexity, all this careful balance of equipment and fighting style, were real people with real lives. Picture a retiarius named Flamma, sitting in his cell the night before a fight, carefully checking his net for weak spots, practicing the wrist movements that will determine whether his cast is accurate. He's fought 23 times, won 21, been granted the wooden sword of freedom 4 times, and chosen to continue fighting each time. Why would a man choose to remain a gladiator when he could be free? Perhaps because this is the only world he knows, the only place where he feels truly alive. Perhaps because the roar of the crowd, the perfect moment of victory, the respect of his peers is worth more to him than the uncertain freedom of civilian life. Or picture a Murmillo named Tigris, a former Germanic warrior who was captured in battle and trained as a gladiator. He carries himself with the dignity of a born fighter, has learned to speak Latin with a careful accent, has adapted his native fighting style to the requirements of the arena. He sends money to his family in Germania, hoping to buy their freedom as well as his own. Each piece of equipment in this armory represents not just a tool of combat, but a human story. The shield that protected a man through 50 fights. The sword that won its bearer fame and fortune. The helmet that witnessed both victory and defeat, that caught the cheers of the crowd and the prayers of the desperate. As you walk through these quiet chambers, touching these ancient weapons with your imagination, remember that each one was held by hands that shook with fear and trembled with excitement, wielded by hearts that beat with hope and desperation, carried by souls that found meaning in the most unlikely places. Let the weight of these objects settle in your mind, not as instruments of violence, but as tools of a strange and complex art form, as props in a drama that revealed fundamental truths about human nature, about the relationship between life and death, about the ways people find meaning in struggle and conflict. We're walking now through the pre-dawn quiet of the most famous gladiator training facility in the ancient world, the Ludus Magnus, the Great School, located just east of the Colosseum and connected to it by an underground tunnel that still exists today. But in our peaceful journey through time, we're experiencing this place not as a prison or a death factory, but as a complex community where some of history's most skilled warriors learned their deadly art. Picture yourself in the central courtyard as the first light of dawn touches the high walls. The training arena is perfectly oval, a scaled-down version of the Colosseum itself, with sand raked smooth and unmarked by the day's activities to come. Stone columns support covered walkways where gladiators will soon emerge from their cells, but for now, everything is still, peaceful, waiting. The Ludus Magnus could house nearly 3,000 gladiators, making it larger than many Roman towns. It was a city within a city, with its own hierarchy, its own customs, its own unique culture that blended military discipline with theatrical performance, Roman efficiency with the diverse traditions of fighters from across the empire. The lanista, the school's owner and chief trainer, is already awake, making his morning rounds. Picture him as a man in his 50s, perhaps a former gladiator himself, scarred but dignified, walking quietly through the sleeping quarters. His name might be Gaius Antonius Maximus, and he owns this school along with 2 others in smaller cities. He's a businessman, but is also something like a father figure to the hundreds of men under his care. Each gladiator represents a significant investment. A novice might cost 2,000 denarii to purchase and train, while a veteran could be worth 10,000 or more. The lanista must balance the need for spectacular contests with the economic reality that dead gladiators represent lost capital. He's constantly calculating which fighters to risk in dangerous matches, which to protect for future profitable contests, which to retire before they suffer career-ending injuries. As dawn breaks fully, the first stirrings of life begin in the gladiator quarters. Picture the living conditions: small cells, about 10 feet by 12 feet, each housing 1 or 2 gladiators. The walls are thick stone, the floors are packed earth covered with straw, the single small window provides just enough light to see by. The door is heavy wood reinforced with iron, locked from the outside each night. But these aren't exactly prison cells. Successful gladiators might have decorated their walls with murals, kept small shrines to their favorite gods, even had visits from admirers and family members. The cells of the most famous fighters were more like modest hotel rooms than prison chambers. The morning begins with the clanging of a bronze gong. Gradually, the sounds of waking fill the complex: coughing, quiet conversations, the shuffle of sandaled feet on stone floors. Guards walk through the corridors, unlocking doors, conducting the morning head count. The gladiators file out of their cells in small groups, moving toward the common areas for their first meal of the day. Picture the dining hall. Long wooden tables and benches, oil lamps providing warm light, the smell of cooking food mixing with the scent of olive oil and leather. The gladiators eat in groups based on their fighting styles, the heavily armed fighters at one table, the net men at another, the beast fighters in their own section. This isn't enforced segregation but natural affinity, the way soldiers from the same unit tend to stick together. The food is simple but nutritious. Barley porridge flavored with honey, bread, cheese, dried fruit, occasionally meat or fish. The gladiators were sometimes called barley eaters because their diet was so grain-heavy, but this wasn't poverty food. It was carefully planned nutrition designed to build the kind of muscle and endurance needed for combat. After breakfast, the real work begins. Picture the training arena filling with activity as different groups of gladiators begin their daily routines. The newest recruits, many of them former soldiers or condemned criminals, start with basic conditioning: running, jumping, lifting weights made of stone and lead. They're learning to move in armor, to maintain their balance, to build the specific muscle groups they'll need for their chosen fighting style. The novice gladiators practice with wooden swords against sturdy posts. The posts are carved and shaped to represent different types of opponents, and the trainees learn to strike specific target areas, to defend against predictable attacks, to move their feet in the proper patterns. The sound of wood on wood creates a gentle, rhythmic percussion that echoes through the courtyard. More experienced fighters work with their trainers on advanced techniques. A veteran Murmillo might spend an hour perfecting a particular shield maneuver, practicing it over and over until it becomes instinctive. A skilled retiarius might work on his net casting accuracy, aiming at moving targets, learning to retrieve and recast his net with lightning speed. The most senior gladiators spar with each other using practice weapons. These sessions are carefully supervised, with trainers watching every move, calling out corrections, occasionally stopping the action to demonstrate proper technique. The atmosphere is serious but not hostile. These men know they might face each other in the arena someday, but they also know that learning from each other makes them all more likely to survive. Picture a training session between two experienced fighters. Marcus, a Thrax who has won 15 fights, is sparring with Gaius, a Secutor with 12 victories. They circle each other with the fluid grace of dancers, their practice weapons moving in complex patterns of attack and defense. The trainer calls out suggestions: Marcus, keep your shield higher. Gaius, watch his footwork. This is combat as art form, violence transformed into skilled performance. The training is relentless but not cruel. The Lannister and his trainers understand that broken spirits fight poorly, that gladiators need to maintain their pride and dignity to perform well in the arena. Discipline is strict but fair. Punishment is swift but not arbitrary. The goal is to create warriors who will bring honor to the school, not broken men who will die quickly and shamefully. Around midday, the gladiators break for their main meal. Picture them gathering in the shade of the covered walkways, sharing food and conversation. The talk is of many things: upcoming fights, gossip from other schools, news from home provinces, speculation about which trainers favor which students. These are not just warriors but men with the full range of human interests and concerns. Some gladiators use this time to write letters. A Gallic fighter might dictate a message to his family in distant Gaul, sending money he's earned from victories and hoping to arrange for his wife and children to visit. A Germanic warrior might write to his brother, describing life in the school, sharing techniques he's learned, maintaining connections to the world beyond the arena. Others spend the break time in religious observance. The gladiator schools were surprisingly tolerant of different faiths, understanding that men facing death need spiritual comfort. There might be a small shrine to Mars, the god of war, where Roman gladiators offer prayers for strength and courage. In another corner, a group of Syrian fighters might honor their homeland's deities, while Germanic warriors might make offerings to their tribal gods. The afternoon brings more training, but also time for the gladiators to practice the theatrical aspects of their profession. They rehearse their entrances, their salutes to the crowd, their victory celebrations. They learn to read the mood of the audience, to play to the crowd's emotions, to make their fights as dramatically satisfying as possible. Picture a group of gladiators practicing their pre-fight rituals. They march in formation, their practice armor gleaming in the afternoon sun, their movements precise and coordinated. This is part military parade, part theatrical performance, part religious ceremony. The crowd's enjoyment depends not just on the quality of the fighting but on the entire spectacle, from the opening procession to the final victory celebration. Some gladiators receive special training in showmanship. They learn to fall dramatically when wounded, to appeal to the crowd with convincing gestures, to make their victories look effortless and their defeats look heroic. This isn't deception but skilled performance. The difference between mere fighting and true entertainment. The sun dips below the horizon and the bustling clamor of the ludi, the gladiator training school, slowly fades. The warriors of ancient Rome begin their evening rituals. The hard clang of wooden swords gives way to softer sounds, footsteps echoing down stone corridors, murmured conversations, and the gentle splash of water. After hours of relentless training, these men move towards a sanctuary that was a rare luxury in Roman life, the bathhouse. Imagine the bathhouse, a warm oasis amid the starkness of gladiatorial life. Though public baths were common in Rome, the gladiators' access to the baths inside or near their schools offered them a privilege many free Roman citizens could not regularly enjoy. Here, in the steamy embrace of heated pools and warm water, the gladiators soothed their aching muscles, fatigued from the day's rigorous drills and sparring sessions. The steam rises in swirling clouds, filling the air with a comforting haze, softening the rough edges of sweat and grime that clung to their skin. The bathhouse was more than just a place for physical cleansing. It was a vital social space where bonds were forged and nurtured. Among these warriors, whose daily lives were shadowed by death and violence, the bathhouse offered moments of respite and connection. Within its marble walls and mosaic floors, gladiators found a rare chance for relaxed conversation, laughter, and the exchange of stories. Here, the facade of the ferocious fighter gave way to the vulnerable man, brothers in arms sharing the weight of a perilous existence. The friendships formed within the gladiator schools often ran deeper than many relationships outside those walls. Unlike the free citizens of Rome, whose lives were divided by social class, wealth, and birth, gladiators were united by their unique and harrowing experience. They lived each day with the ever-present knowledge that they might not see tomorrow. Death was not an abstract concept, but a tangible force lurking just beyond the arena gates. In this crucible, they forged surrogate families, creating networks of loyalty, trust, and mutual protection that transcended their diverse origins. Picture two gladiators, hailing from different corners of the vast Roman Empire, perhaps one from the sun-drenched hills of Gaul, the other from the rugged provinces of Dacia. As the steam rises around them, they sit side by side on the warm stone benches of the bathhouse. One teaches the other words in his native tongue, sharing the sounds and rhythms of a distant homeland. The other responds with tales of festivals, rituals, and legends from his own culture, weaving a tapestry of shared human experience across the boundaries of language and geography. Their conversation drifts to deeper themes. They speak of philosophy and religion, exploring the gods they worship and the beliefs that offer them comfort. They reveal their dreams for the future, some hope for freedom, others for redemption or glory. They confess fears, too, the dread of the next fight, the uncertainty of survival, the pain of loss. These moments reveal the full humanity of these men, warriors not only of the arena but of heart and mind. As twilight deepens, the evening meal brings a quieter, more subdued atmosphere than the boisterous gatherings of morning and midday. The fatigue from hours of grueling practice weighs heavily on each man. Some eat quickly and silently, their minds already turning to the challenges the next day will bring. Others linger longer, savoring the fleeting warmth of companionship before retreating to the solitude of their cells. The communal dining halls, filled earlier with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, now grow hushed. The flickering light of oil lamps casts long shadows over tired faces. The shared meals, simple and nourishing, consist largely of barley porridge, lentils, and the occasional piece of bread or dried fruit. Though humble, the food is designed to sustain strength and endurance, fueling the gladiators' bodies for what lies ahead. As night settles over the ludus, the gladiators retreat to their cells, small, austere rooms where personal possessions are few, but thoughts are many. Picture these men lying on simple wooden beds, their bodies exhausted but their minds awake. Some read by the dim glow of an oil lamp, perhaps poring over scrolls of philosophy, poetry, or religious texts, reminders of a world beyond the arena. Others turn inward, practicing prayers to the gods or meditating on their fate, seeking solace and strength in silence. For many, these quiet moments are a time of reflection on the lives they have led and the uncertain paths ahead. The choices that brought them here may have been forced or voluntary, but now, in the stillness, they wrestle with questions of survival, honor, and freedom. Could today's fight be their last? What legacy would they leave behind? Would they ever know a life beyond the sands of the arena? In this darkness, the lines between warrior and man blur. The gladiator's mask fades, revealing the fragile, complex humanity beneath. They are not merely performers or victims, but individuals with hopes, regrets, and the unyielding will to live. This glimpse into their nightly world offers a deeper understanding of the gladiator's experience. It is a life marked not only by violence and spectacle, but by profound moments of connection, resilience, and hope. Their stories remind us that behind every legend is a human soul seeking meaning in the face of hardship. As you listen, let the quiet strength of these men fill your thoughts. Let their endurance and courage resonate softly in your mind, a gentle reminder of the timeless human spirit. And as you drift deeper into rest, carried by the rhythm of calm and quiet, imagine the bathhouse steam swirling away, the flickering oil lamps dimming, and the gladiators settling into peaceful sleep, if only for a night, before the dawn calls them once again to the sands of history. Some gladiators kept journals, recording their thoughts and experiences. Others carved messages and drawings into their cell walls, leaving permanent records of their time in the school. These graffiti, some of which survive today, reveal the full humanity of these ancient warriors. Their loves, their fears, their dreams, their determination to be remembered as more than just entertainment. The night sounds of the gladiator school are gentle, quiet conversations through cell walls, the soft footsteps of guards making their rounds, the distant sounds of the city beyond the walls. It's a strange kind of peace, the calm before the storm of combat, the rest that warriors need before they face the ultimate test of their skills and courage. Let these images of daily life drift through your mind. The routine of training, eating, resting, the bonds of friendship formed in the shadow of death, the way human communities adapt and thrive even in the most challenging circumstances. Feel the rhythm of these ancient days, the cycle of preparation and performance, the quiet dignity of men who found meaning in the most unlikely places. Now we're going to take a very slow walk into the Colosseum, not as it exists today, weathered and partly ruined, but as it was in its glory days, when it was called the Flavian Amphitheatre and could hold 50,000 people. Picture yourself approaching from the street. The massive travertine walls rise above you, elegant arches repeating in perfect symmetry. The morning sun creates geometric patterns of light and shadow across the facade. You hear the distant murmur of crowds already gathering inside. As you pass through one of the 80 entrances, notice how efficiently the Romans organized crowd flow. Each ticket corresponds to a specific section, a specific seat. No chaos, no crushing. Even in their entertainments, Romans prized order and organization. The corridors are cool and dim, a relief from the bright morning sun. You can smell, what? Stone dust, olive oil from the food vendors, the leather of thousands of sandals, the sweat of anticipation. And underneath it all, the faint scent of the arena sand, which has absorbed so much over the years. You climb the stairs slowly, emerging into the seating area as the great arena spreads before you. The oval of golden sand seems to glow in the morning light. The underground chambers, the hypogeum, are hidden beneath, but you can sense the activity below. Animals pacing, gladiators preparing, stagehands checking the elaborate elevator systems. Look around at the seating. The marble seats closest to the arena for senators and wealthy citizens. Above them, the wooden benches for the middle classes. Higher still, the standing room for the poor and slaves. Everyone has their place, their view, their role in this grand theatre of life and death. The awning, the velarium, stretches overhead, operated by sailors from the Roman fleet. It ripples gently in the breeze, creating moving patterns of light and shade across the crowd. Even the sun is managed, controlled, made to serve the spectacle. When the games begin, imagine the sound. Not just the roar of 50,000 voices, but the echo of that roar bouncing off the walls, creating layers of sound that wash over you like waves. The architecture amplifies everything, every clash of weapons, every gasp of the crowd, every moment of dramatic silence. Picture a naval battle, a Naumachia, where they flooded the arena floor and brought in ships to recreate famous sea battles. The logistics alone are staggering: thousands of gallons of water, elaborate drainage systems, authentic warships scaled to fit the space. As the day progresses and the sun moves across the sky, notice how the light changes the mood. Morning games bright and energetic, afternoon contests in golden light, evening matches dramatic with long shadows. Let yourself rest in this ancient afternoon, feeling the warm stone beneath you, the gentle conversations around you, the anticipation that hangs in the air like incense. Now we're drifting forward through time again, watching as the great gladiator games slowly fade from Roman life, like a fire gradually burning down to embers. Picture Rome in its later centuries. The empire is changing, becoming more complex, more cosmopolitan. The simple warrior values that once made gladiator contests so meaningful are being replaced by different ideals, different entertainments. The games became increasingly expensive. Wild animals had to be imported from farther and farther away as local populations were hunted to extinction. Training gladiators required enormous investments of time and money. The elaborate spectacles that crowds now expected cost more than many cities could afford. Christianity was rising, and with it, new ideas about the value of human life, the morality of violence as entertainment. Christian emperors began to question whether a civilization that claimed to worship a god of peace should celebrate death as sport. Imagine the last gladiator games: smaller crowds, less enthusiasm, the sense that an era was ending. Some gladiators found themselves unemployed, their skills no longer valued. Others adapted, becoming soldiers, bodyguards, trainers in different kinds of combat. The great amphitheaters didn't disappear overnight. They were gradually converted to other uses. Some became housing for the poor. Others were used for religious ceremonies. A few became fortresses. The Colosseum itself was partially dismantled, its stones used to build churches and palaces. Picture grass growing slowly through the arena sand, weeds pushing up between the marble seats. The sounds of combat gradually replaced by the sounds of wind and birds and children playing in the ruins. But the gladiators didn't truly disappear. They transformed. Their legacy lives on in our modern sports, our action movies, our fascination with warrior culture. The same human desires that filled the Colosseum, for heroes, for spectacle, for the thrill of victory and the drama of defeat, still fill our stadiums and theaters today. The games ended, but the dreams they represented simply found new forms, new expressions, new arenas. Let this transition settle in your mind. The way cultures evolve, the way human needs find new outlets, the way nothing truly disappears but only changes form. We've traveled together through centuries, from sacred funeral rites to grand imperial spectacles to gentle ruin and renewal. The gladiators have shared their stories with us, whispered their secrets across the millennia. What have we learned in this long, peaceful journey? Perhaps that humans have always struggled with the same contradictions: the desire for both safety and excitement, the need for both individual achievement and communal belonging, the tension between civilization and the wild energies that civilization tries to contain. The gladiators were mirrors, reflecting Roman values, Roman anxieties, Roman dreams. They showed their audiences what courage looked like, what skill could accomplish, what grace might be found even in extremity. They made death into art, violence into poetry, struggle into meaning. But they also showed the cost of those transformations, the price paid by real people with real lives, real families, real dreams of their own. The arena gave Rome its heroes and its spectacles, but it also created its own particular forms of tragedy and loss. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you don't need to carry the weight of these ancient contradictions. Just let them settle like dust on old stones, like leaves falling in an abandoned courtyard, like the last echoes of a crowd that cheered 2,000 years ago. As the sun sets on the vast arenas of ancient Rome, and the cheers of the crowds fade into silence, we find ourselves stepping back from the spectacle, the swords, the shields, the blood-soaked sands, to look deeper at the lives behind the legend. The gladiators were more than entertainers. They were men caught in the tangled web of power, survival, and hope. Their stories remind us that history is never just about events or dates. It's about the people who lived through them, their fears, their dreams, and their resilience. These warriors were forged not only by their weapons but by the relentless discipline of the ludi, the training schools that mold them from flesh and bone into symbols of strength and endurance. But beyond the armor and spectacle lies a quiet truth. The life of a gladiator was brutal, uncertain, and often short. Many entered the arena as slaves or prisoners, stripped of freedom, yet some chose this path, drawn by the promise of glory, camaraderie, or even a chance at liberty. In their struggle, they faced not just physical opponents but the ever-present shadow of death and the heavy weight of fate. The ludi taught them how to fight, yes, but also how to endure, to bear pain and fear, and to stand tall in the face of overwhelming odds. These schools were harsh, unyielding places where each day tested the limits of human endurance. Yet within those walls, bonds formed, friendships and rivalries that echoed far beyond the training grounds. But the gladiators didn't truly disappear. They transformed. They stepped out of the Colosseum's shadow and into our modern world, not as warriors in chains, but as symbols, as echoes, as the very fabric of our culture's fascination with strength, spectacle, and survival. Their legacy pulses through every roaring stadium, every combat sport, every action film where heroes face impossible odds with unwavering resolve. We haven't stopped watching the fight. We've just changed the arena. The thirst for spectacle, rooted deep in the Roman soul, never vanished. It merely adapted. Today, the roars of crowds echo not from stone amphitheaters but from sleek stadiums, from cinema screens, from live streams across the globe. The uniforms have changed. The stakes are no longer life or death. But the emotional core, the desire for glory, the tension of rivalry, the thrill of survival, it's all still there. Whether it's an Olympic sprinter charging down the lane, a UFC fighter entering the octagon, or a fictional warrior facing a monstrous foe on screen, we are still watching, still cheering, still yearning for something raw, something real. Because the gladiator is more than a historical figure. He is a metaphor, a mirror, a question. Left-pointing magnifying glass, what did gladiators teach us about ourselves? As we lay back and let our thoughts drift gently into night, consider what these ancient warriors truly represented. They stood at the crossroads of spectacle and suffering. They embodied the paradox of heroism born from oppression. They lived lives of both discipline and exploitation, valor and violence, tragedy and triumph. They were symbols of Rome's power and victims of it. They were forced into combat, yes, but they also became icons. Revered, remembered, their names etched in graffiti on stone walls, their stories whispered in taverns, chanted by children, idolized by emperors. Even today, as we navigate the complexities of modern entertainment, we might ask, are we watching something new, or merely an echo of what has always been? Counterclockwise arrows, history repeats in softer costumes. The games ended, but the dreams they represented simply found new forms, new expressions, new stages. In esports arenas, where digital warriors compete for millions. In football stadiums, where athletes are drafted, trained, and paraded. In film franchises, where gladiator tropes still define our heroes. Even in reality TV, where contestants battle for social survival in manufactured environments, there lies the shadow of the arena. We don't call it blood sport anymore, but the mechanics, still familiar. The pageantry, the polarization, the applause, the loss, the commodification of courage, and at the heart of it all, the human yearning to see someone face something hard and prevail. Why gladiator stories still resonate. Humans have always been drawn to extremes. Extreme pain, extreme courage, extreme beauty, and in the arena, those extremes collided daily. The gladiators gave us a concentrated version of life, where outcomes were decisive, and identity was laid bare. They showed us that fear and bravery are not opposites, but companions. That discipline can elevate suffering into art. That even in chains, the human spirit can inspire awe. Perhaps that's why they linger so strongly in our collective imagination. We don't remember them because they fought. We remember them because they mattered, in spite of the odds, the rules, the cage. What do we take to sleep tonight? As your body grows still and your thoughts become gentle waves. Let this transition settle in your mind. The way cultures evolve, the way human needs find new expressions, the way nothing truly disappears, but only changes form. We've walked together from sacred funeral rites to the most famous amphitheater in the world. From elite funerals to the roar of 50,000. From bronze helmets and wooden swords to cinema screens and pay-per-view fights. And through it all, the question remains. What does it mean to struggle publicly, to turn violence into ritual, to find meaning in pain? What does it say about us that we're still watching? The human side of the arena. Behind the armor, the training, the stagecraft, there were people. Men from Gaul, from Numidia, from Judea, from Rome itself. People with languages, families, gods, dreams. People who didn't ask to become icons, but who became them nonetheless. In the ludi, the gladiator schools, they trained side by side. They suffered. They learned. They formed bonds stronger than chains. They were forced into competition, but they found brotherhood. They were surrounded by violence, but they discovered resilience. One might be teaching another his native tongue. One might be whispering a prayer before sleep. One might dream of freedom, another of revenge. Each was more than a warrior. He was a man caught in history's machine, spinning not by his will, but still shaping the world with each fight, each fall, each final breath. Last quarter moon symbol, the arena falls silent. And now, the crowds are gone. The sand is undisturbed. The stones remain, but the blood has long since faded. We look at the ruins and feel a strange kind of stillness. The grandeur is gone, but the meaning remains. The gladiators have told their story, and in the telling, they've reminded us of something vital. That spectacle is never innocent. That entertainment always costs something. That empires often hide their cruelty in applause. But also, that individuals can shine through the darkness. That resilience can come from the unlikeliest places. That even in chains, people can inspire freedom. Blue Book, a final whisper from the past. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you don't need to carry the weight of these contradictions. Just let them settle, like dust on old stone, like shadows stretching across marble, like the last cheers echoing through an empty corridor. Let the gladiators fade gently, not into oblivion, but into memory. Because they were never just fighters. They were reflections. They were warnings. They were hopes in muscle and blood. They were human. And so are we. Sleeping symbols sleep, now, beneath ancient skies. So rest now, dear listener. Let the swords fall silent. Let the torches dim. You've traveled across centuries tonight. You've walked through triumph and tragedy. You've felt the weight of chains and the lightness of memory. And when morning comes, you'll carry none of it. Only the knowing. Only the whisper that somewhere, long ago, they fought, they fell, and they taught us something we must never forget. That struggle can be noble. That performance can reveal truth. That even under empire, humanity endures. So let the world fade. Let history breathe. And may your dreams be peaceful and free. When the games begin, imagine the sound. Not just the roar of 50,000 voices, but the echo of that roar, bouncing, building, folding in on itself, until the arena feels like it's breathing. The Colosseum isn't just a structure. It's a living instrument. Its stone and arches, its chambers and corridors, amplify everything. The clash of iron against bronze rings like a bell. A single shout can ripple across the stands like thunder. You are part of the chorus. Now picture a different kind of spectacle, a Naumachia, a naval battle in miniature. They flood the arena floor, transforming dry sand into a man-made sea. Wooden warships drift into place. Slaves disguised as sailors ready the sails. Warriors dressed as historical foes, the Carthaginians, the Greeks, the pirates of Cilicia, take their places. And in the emperor's box, a nod, a hand gesture. The battle begins. Spears fly, ships crash, water churns red, and thousands of spectators lean forward, breathless, watching history reenacted not for education, but for awe. It's theatre, it's engineering, it's empire, showing off its might. Because only a civilization at its peak could afford to turn a stadium into an ocean. But as the sun travels across the sky, the mood shifts. Morning games are lively, full of pageantry and laughter. But by afternoon, the light grows golden. Shadows stretch long across the sand. The combat becomes more intense. The cheering slows. By early evening, when the final matches take place, the Colosseum glows with twilight. The games feel sacred, ceremonial. The crowd, once raucous, now watches in hushed reverence. A champion's final salute. A last, dramatic duel. Then silence. Sunrise, the fire burns low, Rome in transition. Now drift with me through time once more. We move past the height of empire, past the golden age of Augustus and the architectural marvels of Trajan and Hadrian. The Rome we knew begins to change. Its streets are still paved with marble. Its temples still rise with pride. But something subtle has shifted. The fire that fueled the gladiator games is beginning to burn low. Why? Because Rome itself is evolving. The empire grows vast, too vast. Administratively complex, culturally diverse. A city once united by shared rituals and warrior values now struggles to maintain cohesion. The gladiatorial games, once essential, now feel expensive, antiquated. Logistics become a burden. Wild animals are harder to find. Lions and leopards must now be shipped from Africa, bears from Germania, tigers from distant Asia. Many species that once roared in the arena have been hunted to extinction. The cost of training gladiators skyrockets. Fewer prisoners of war remain. Slaves must now be bought or bred specifically for combat. Audiences grow jaded, no longer satisfied with simple fights. They want pageantry, novelty, mythological reenactments. What once cost thousands, now costs millions. Cross the rise of Christianity and a new moral compass. And something else is rising. A new faith. A religion of peace, of humility, of spiritual redemption. Christianity. Its ideas spread quietly at first, whispered in homes and catacombs. But as centuries pass, it gains power, converts, clergy, eventually emperors. And Christianity asks difficult questions. Can a God of mercy bless a death match? Can a society built on sacrifice and compassion cheer for blood? In 325 CE, Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor, banned certain gladiatorial events. His sons go further. By the late 4th century, the blood games are officially discouraged. By the early 5th, they are nearly gone. Not outlawed in one dramatic stroke, but starved, sidelined, forgotten. Abandoned House the final games, and the fading echo. Picture now, the last gladiator matches. The crowd is smaller, the cheers more subdued. The empire has divided. Rome is no longer the center of the world. It is a relic holding on to faded glory. The final warriors enter the arena not with grandeur, but with resignation. Many are not fighters by choice. Some are criminals. Others are remnants of a dying tradition. The sand is thinner. The equipment, second-hand. The spectacle, muted. And then, one day, it stops. The crowds don't return. The doors close. The arena stands silent. Some gladiators find new roles. They become soldiers, fighting for pay, not applause. Or bodyguards, protecting nobles with the skills once used for entertainment. Others teach, passing on techniques to future generations of warriors. But for most, the world moves on without them. Classical building hashed the arena's afterlife. The great amphitheaters don't vanish overnight. Instead, they adapt. The Colosseum becomes a shelter for Rome's poor. Some theaters are converted into churches, hosting a very different kind of ritual. Others become quarries, stone by stone, dismantled to build cathedrals and palaces. The empire recycles its own past. And where gladiators once stood, now stand priests, peasants, and pilgrims. Picture grass growing through the sand. Weeds overtaking marble. Children playing games in the ruins of games. Stray dogs basking in sun-warmed stone. Birds nesting where banners once flew. The sounds of combat fade, replaced by laughter, by silence, by time. Ear of rice, the legacy that remains. But though the games have ended, their legacy survives, in ways both visible and invisible. In our obsession with strength, in our admiration of discipline, in our fascination with duel and drama, risk and reward. Today's heroes may wear sports jerseys instead of helmets. They may fight with words or moves, not swords. But the craving for spectacle, the communal experience of watching someone strive, struggle, succeed or fall, that remains. And that craving is deeply Roman. The gladiator, stripped of violence, remains in our films, our stories, our symbols. Because deep down, we still wonder what it means to stand before a crowd and fight for survival, not just with weapons, but with courage. Sleep now among the stones. As the evening deepens and your breathing softens, rest in this knowing. The gladiator is gone, but his memory walks with us. He teaches us that civilization is not always gentle, that entertainment can carry weight, that power often hides behind applause. And he teaches us, too, that even in chains, the human spirit can rise. So sleep now, dear traveler through time. Let the Colosseum crumble. Let the banners fall. Let the echoes fade. And dream of quieter things, of wind in olive trees, of soft earth beneath sandals, of stars above ruined marble. The gladiators have left the arena, but their story remains, waiting, always, in the quiet. The first event is a venatio, a wild animal hunt. A distant door lifts, and from the shadows of the Hypogeum emerges a lion. Golden, majestic, frightened. The beast blinks in the sun, hesitates. Across the arena, a venator, a beast fighter, steps forward. Light armor, a spear. Silence descends. The audience holds its breath. What follows is not a simple battle. It's theater. The venator taunts, dodges, dances. He showcases skill, not slaughter. And when the lion is finally subdued, whether by weapon or trap, the crowd erupts. Rome has triumphed over nature. Then come other animals. Leopards, boars, even ostriches, chased by archers for laughs. Some shows feature trained elephants. In others, condemned criminals are thrown unarmed to hungry beasts, their deaths woven into mythological plays, an execution masked as drama. It is brutal. It is mesmerizing. It is Roman. Cross swords hash the midday interlude, judgment by blood. As the sun reaches its peak, the executions begin. This was the Roman way, punishment as performance. The condemned are brought into the arena, sometimes reenacting legends. A man might be cast as Icarus, climbing a wax-winged scaffold before falling into a pit of spikes. Others play Hercules, battling fake monsters before succumbing to real ones. It is grotesque, but it is orderly, predictable. Crime meets consequence. The audience sees justice. The empire reminds its people who holds power. This was part of Rome's genius. Even cruelty had structure. Even death was orchestrated. Shield # afternoon glory, the gladiators' moment. And now, the time you've waited for. The editor, the game's sponsor, rises. His signal is clear. Gladiators enter. Pairs emerge from opposite ends of the arena. Each is greeted with cheers, jeers, or chants. Some are seasoned veterans with fan followings. Others are new recruits, fighting for their names to be remembered. They salute the emperor. Ave, Imperator. Morituri te salutant. Hail, Emperor. Those who are about to die salute you. Not all will die, but all will fight. Combat and complexity, not just a bloodbath. Contrary to popular myth, most gladiator fights did not end in death. These men were investments. Training a gladiator took months, sometimes years. Lanisti, gladiator managers, kept careful records. Injured men were nursed back to health. Skilled ones were prized. A good fight was balanced, not a massacre, but a duel. Think of it as ancient mixed martial arts. Each style countered another. A retiarius with net and trident versus a heavily armored secutor. A nimble thrakes dodging the slow blows of a murmillo. The fights could last minutes or feel like eternities. Dust flew. Armor clanged. Breath rasped. And then, a victor. If his opponent yields, the crowd may choose mercy or death. Thumbs are turned, sideways, up, or down. The editor watches. The emperor watches. And the gladiator waits. Sometimes mercy is granted. Sometimes it's denied. And the crowd roars, either way. Sunrise over mountains, evening shadows. The arena grows quiet. By late afternoon, the final matches end. The sun drops low. The velarium ripples softly in the Roman breeze. The arena, once loud and alive, now echoes only with footsteps. Slaves rake the sand, collecting weapons, tending to the wounded. You exit with the crowd, moving through the corridors once again. The chatter is quieter now, more reflective. Today was entertainment, but it was also empire. A reminder of Rome's power, its control, its pageantry, and its pride. Bed # back at the ludus, dreams of glory and escape. And what of the gladiators? They return to the ludus, the training school. Some are blooded but victorious. Others are bitter in defeat. A few will not return at all. But in the calm of the evening, beneath torchlight, they eat, they drink, they talk. Some laugh. Others pray. Many are silent, staring into the darkness, wondering what tomorrow brings. And in this space between fight and fate, they are most human. Not champions, not symbols, just men. With fears, with hopes, with stories. One writes letters. Another hums a tune from his homeland. Two practice slow, careful drills by moonlight. No armor, just instinct. You might find them reading from borrowed scrolls, discussing philosophy in broken Latin, arguing softly about fate versus free will. Because even in chains, the mind wanders. The soul dreams. And perhaps, when sleep comes, it comes gently. Crescent moon drift off with the empire. So now, you may close your eyes. You've seen the grandeur, the cruelty, the brilliance and the brutality. You've walked the corridors of the Colosseum, sat among senators and slaves, watched men face fate beneath the gaze of an empire. And you've seen what lies beyond the fight. Resilience, brotherhood, humanity. So sleep, now, wrapped in the whispers of history. Let your breath slow. Let your muscles soften. Let the stone walls of Rome fade into shadow. You are not in danger. You are in memory. The arena rests. The empire dreams. And you are part of its story. Even in silence, the Colosseum speaks. Its broken arches, its worn stones, its forgotten stairways, they carry the breath of centuries. Long after the crowds vanished and the sands grew still, the spirit of the arena lingered. Not in the violence, but in the resilience. In the echo of those who stood not for conquest, but for dignity. Each scarred wall holds 1,000 names never written down. Each gust of wind through the ruins carries the memory of a world that once rose in spectacle and now rests in reflection. And tonight, as sleep gently pulls you into its embrace, let those echoes cradle your thoughts, reminding you that even the loudest empires fade, but stories, especially the quiet ones, endure. And now, as we leave behind the sand-swept arena and step away from the roaring crowd, we enter a quieter space, the slow, fading twilight of empire, where memory speaks louder than any cheer ever could. The gladiators are gone. The crowds have long dispersed. The emperors who once ruled the world now rest in stone. But the stories remain, not etched into marble, but into the human imagination. Stories of strength, of suffering, of survival. Of men who lived between glory and death, between violence and vulnerability. Of a people who demanded spectacle, and a world that gave it to them. We call them gladiators, but they were more than fighters. They were reflections of everything Rome feared, and everything Rome celebrated. Order and chaos, discipline and savagery, fame and forgetfulness. And though the Colosseum crumbles slowly under the weight of time, its meaning lingers. Not because of its scale or its history, but because of what it reveals about us. Even today, the spirit of the gladiator survives, not in blood, but in stories. In stadiums packed with cheering crowds. As twilight deepens and the last hues of the fading sun slip beyond the horizon, the gladiator's day of grueling exertion slowly winds down. The evening meal arrives, bringing a markedly quieter, more subdued atmosphere than the noisy, bustling gatherings of the morning and midday hours. The weight of exhaustion settles on every man's shoulders, muscles aching, minds weary from relentless training and mental strain. Some eat quickly and silently, their faces grim, their thoughts already focused on the trials awaiting them come dawn. Others linger, savoring the fleeting warmth of camaraderie in the dim light before retreating to the solitude and silence of their small, Spartan cells. The great communal dining halls, earlier filled with the clatter of wooden bowls and plates, the hum and laughter of shared stories and light-hearted banter, now fall into a hushed reverence. Flickering oil lamps cast long, wavering shadows across weathered, tired faces, illuminating eyes heavy with fatigue but still holding sparks of resilience. The meals are simple yet carefully designed for sustenance. Hearty barley porridge, rich in carbohydrates, dried lentils, offering vital protein. Occasional crusts of coarse bread or fragments of sun-dried fruit provide rare sweetness. These humble offerings are the fuel for bodies that must endure not just brutal combat but also endless repetition, discipline, and pain. Nutrition, in the world of gladiators, is not about luxury or pleasure. It is a matter of survival, endurance, and maintaining the fine balance between strength and exhaustion. As night fully settles over the ludus, the gladiator training school, the fighters slowly disperse to their austere quarters. These cells are small, Spartan rooms, often no more than a few paces across, with sparse furnishings. A simple wooden bed or pallet, a small bench or stool, perhaps a narrow shelf to hold whatever personal possessions could be acquired. These possessions were few, often sentimental, letters from loved ones, small tokens or talismans, perhaps a carved wooden figurine. In this intimate solitude, the gladiators are free from the eyes of trainers and spectators. Here, the warrior's armor and mask are shed, revealing the man beneath. Imagine the quiet of these rooms, the soft scrape of a quill on parchment as some gladiators, who managed to acquire rudimentary literacy, read or write by the flickering glow of an oil lamp. Scrolls of philosophy, poetry, or religious texts might offer mental escape or spiritual strength, reminders of a world far beyond the brutality of the arena and the harsh discipline of the ludus. These texts could be works of Homer or Virgil, tales of gods and heroes who faced insurmountable odds, echoing the gladiators' own struggles. Some might study tactical manuals or practice mental exercises, sharpening minds as well as bodies. Others might turn inward, practicing prayers or rituals in whispered tones, appealing to the Roman gods for protection, courage, or mercy. The gods, Jupiter, Mars, Minerva, offered hope and meaning in a life otherwise marked by uncertainty and danger. The sacred rituals, whether simple or elaborate, formed a bridge between mortal fragility and divine strength. Meditation and reflection provided moments of peace, even as their lives balanced precariously on the edge of violence and death. In the stillness of the night, these men wrestle not only with physical exhaustion but with profound questions of identity and destiny. The choices that led them here were often forced, captured in battle, condemned for crimes, sold into slavery, or sometimes voluntary, driven by ambition, honor, or the slim hope of freedom and fame. Yet regardless of origin, each gladiator contemplates his fate with a complex mixture of hope, fear, pride, and despair. Could today's brutal fight have been their last? Would they survive to see another dawn? What legacy would they leave, etched in the sands of the arena or carried in whispered stories? Would freedom ever be more than a distant dream? These reflections blur the harsh lines between prisoner and hero, slave and warrior, entertainment and tragedy. Here, in these private moments, the gladiator's mask fades, revealing not just a fighter but a deeply human soul. They are not mere performers or faceless victims of a cruel spectacle, but individuals with dreams, regrets, loves, and fears. Complex, multifaceted beings who endure immense suffering and yet cling fiercely to life. Their camaraderie, forged in shared hardship, becomes a surrogate family, offering solidarity in a harsh world. The stories carved into the walls of their cells, the ancient graffiti, stand as silent testaments to this shared humanity. Some gladiators kept journals or scratched names, dates, and drawings into stone or plaster, leaving behind intimate glimpses into their daily lives. These inscriptions reveal everything from the mundane, notes about missing a meal or longing for home, to the profound, declarations of love, prayers for victory, messages of defiance against fate. These ancient scribbles bring the past alive, connecting us across millennia to men who once lived, fought, and dreamed within these very walls. As you listen to their stories, let the quiet strength and resilience of these men fill your thoughts. Let their endurance resonate softly in your mind, a gentle reminder of the timeless human spirit. The gladiators' lives were harsh and short, yet marked by moments of unexpected tenderness, courage, and hope. They remind us that beneath every legend lies a person seeking meaning in the face of hardship. And now, as you drift deeper into rest, carried by the gentle rhythm of calm and quiet, imagine the bathhouse steam swirling slowly away, the flickering oil lamps dimming, and the gladiators settling into peaceful sleep, if only for a single night, before the dawn calls them once again to the sands of history and the eternal arena. This deeply humanized and richly textured glimpse into the nightly life of gladiators expands your narrative with vivid sensory details, emotional depth, historical context, and a soft, reflective tone ideal for SEO-friendly, immersive content that engages your audience for long video formats. It emphasizes themes like endurance, camaraderie, human spirit, and history's personal stories to boost viewer attention and discoverability. But the gladiators didn't truly disappear. They transformed. Their physical forms faded, but their spirit lives on, in modern arenas, in cinema, in combat sports, and in the way we still celebrate strength, spectacle, and survival. The roar of the Colosseum has become the roar of stadiums. The clash of steel now echoes through the choreography of film and the drama of championship matches. What the Romans engineered wasn't just entertainment. It was an enduring cultural blueprint, a formula, a legacy, one that continues to shape how we process conflict, heroism, victory, and defeat. The gladiators were never just fighters. They were a reflection of Rome itself, of its power, of its ambition, of its contradictions. They revealed a civilization that demanded order, but thrived on chaos. A society that claimed virtue, but glorified violence. A world that created myths out of men, and then discarded them when the crowd moved on. And yet, through it all, these men, enslaved, trained, and used for spectacle, left behind something more than broken bones and blood-stained sand. They left behind questions that we still haven't stopped asking. What do we worship in our culture today? What kinds of stories do we pay to see? Who gets turned into heroes? And why? Their world is gone. The empire has crumbled. The arenas have fallen silent. But the human fascination with glory, dominance, sacrifice, and spectacle endures. In different forms, on different stages, but fueled by the same desires. The same emotional DNA that once filled Roman amphitheaters now drives modern entertainment, political theater, and even social media. We may believe we've advanced, but we're still drawn to the same narratives. Of underdogs, of champions, of conflict resolved not through dialogue, but through domination. The gladiators didn't just entertain the Roman people. They taught them what to admire, what to fear, what to celebrate, and in doing so, they helped write the mythology of the Roman world. A mythology that, piece by piece, still survives in ours. We've followed their story from sacred funerals to imperial propaganda, from underground training schools to the grand Colosseum, from the brutality of combat to the quiet dignity of endurance. And at every stage, we saw more than warriors. We saw people, complex, intelligent, vulnerable, forced to live lives shaped by others, yet determined to define themselves through courage, discipline, and presence. They were used, but they were never meaningless. They were consumed by the machine of empire, but they left marks the empire could never erase. Their graffiti still survives. Their names still appear in stone. Their shadows still stretch across history. So what is the legacy of the gladiators? It's not just about blood and sand. It's about how societies use people to shape narratives. It's about how fear is managed, how power is displayed, how control is wrapped in spectacle. And it's about how, even in the darkest of systems, individual lives can resist erasure. Through action, through resilience, through the simple refusal to be forgotten. The story of the gladiator isn't ancient. It's ongoing. And whether we see it in sports, in media, or in politics, it continues to challenge us. What do we truly value? And at what cost does our entertainment come? But beyond the glittering spectacle, the roaring crowds, and the shining armor, there exists a more profound, often overlooked truth, the inner world of the gladiator. Behind every clash of swords and roar of victory was a man who bore the burden of a brutal and unforgiving life. The life of a gladiator was not one of consistent glory. It was harsh, dangerous, and frequently short-lived. Many of these fighters began their journey in chains, prisoners of war, condemned criminals, or enslaved peoples with no say in their fate. And yet, in a strange twist of history, there were those who willingly chose the life of the arena, lured by the flickering promise of fame, camaraderie, survival, or even, in rare cases, their eventual freedom. These men faced more than physical opponents. They fought daily against the creeping specter of death, against fear, loneliness, and the crushing weight of an empire that saw them more as entertainment than as human beings. The gladiator schools, or ludi, were institutions of discipline, designed not just to train bodies for combat but to mold minds into resilient, obedient instruments of spectacle. These were not places of gentle mentorship. They were rigorous, punishing environments where every mistake could mean death in training, and every success only brought more time under the empire's thumb. Yet within these walls of discipline and violence, something undeniably human persisted. Bonds were formed between fighters, bonds of brotherhood, loyalty, rivalry, and sometimes deep friendship. These relationships were born of shared hardship, of nights spent wondering if tomorrow's fight would be their last, of meals shared in silence after bruising practice matches. Through it all, the ludus became not just a prison but a crucible, a place where identity was tested and, sometimes, forged anew. Each time a gladiator stepped into the arena, he played a part in a larger narrative. He was not simply fighting for survival, he was performing. These battles, far from being spontaneous bloodbaths, were often staged with intricate choreography and symbolism. Gladiators became avatars of Roman virtue and vice, of civilization and savagery, of law and chaos. The crowd didn't just witness violence, they witnessed stories of strength, of treachery, of redemption. The games were carefully crafted social mirrors, reflecting the values and anxieties of Roman society. A victorious murmillo might be seen as a symbol of Rome's military dominance. A cunning retiarius could represent wit overcoming brute force. And always, beneath the theatrics, there was real risk. Death was not guaranteed, but it was never far. Every match, no matter how dramatic, was grounded in the terrifying authenticity of real danger. In this carefully curated theatre of blood, the gladiator ceased to be merely a man. He became a symbol, a tool used by emperors and politicians to demonstrate control, to earn public favor, to distract a restless population from the hardships of daily life. He embodied the fragility of life and the brutal efficiency of the Roman machine. He was proof that even the most powerless could rise, if only briefly, to become the focus of an entire city's gaze. But this rise came at a cost. For every name that the crowd remembered, dozens vanished without ceremony. Uncelebrated, unknown, buried in mass graves or left to rot. The glory, while real, was always precarious. And the price for even a moment of it was staggering. As we reflect on the legacy these fighters left behind, we begin to recognize the deep parallels between their world and ours. The arenas may look different today. Modern stadiums, digital screens, streaming platforms, but the core human hunger remains the same. The desire to watch others struggle and succeed. To feel the thrill of competition. To project our hopes and fears onto public figures, warriors, athletes, actors, influencers. The structure of spectacle, of curated performance meant to inspire and distract, continues to shape our modern lives. What were once gladiator chants have become viral chants and fan slogans. The dramas of life and death have been replaced with games of fame and reputation, but the mechanics, power, performance, popularity remain deeply familiar. In this way, the gladiators continue to speak to us. Their presence lingers in our culture, in our media, in the subconscious stories we tell ourselves about what it means to be strong, to be seen, to win. And perhaps that's why their story matters now more than ever. Not just because it entertains or informs, but because it reminds us of what lies beneath the surface of all spectacle, human struggle. These were real men, with real dreams, whose lives were defined by a brutal system, and yet they carved meaning out of it. They created brotherhoods, inspired awe, and left marks, on stones, in stories, in history, that have lasted thousands of years. Their tragedy is not just in their suffering, but in how easily they were consumed by a society that forgot their humanity as soon as the show ended. In considering their lives, we are asked to consider our own. What modern arenas do we step into, willingly or not? What systems shape us, train us, use us? What values are we enacting every day, on social media, in our jobs, in the roles we perform to earn approval, income, or status? And what, if anything, lies beyond the performance? The gladiators teach us not just about Roman cruelty but about human resilience, the ability to endure, to bond, to hope, even in the face of impossible odds. Their stories were carved into prison walls, whispered in dying breaths, remembered in chants long after their last fights. They refused to be forgotten, and in doing so, they gave us not only entertainment, but a blueprint for how meaning can survive in even the darkest places. Their legacy is not one of mere violence, but of transformation. The sword became a symbol. The arena became an idea. The spectacle became a lens through which we can study ourselves, our fascination with power, our tendency to dehumanize, our longing to witness stories of triumph and struggle. And just as Rome eventually dismantled its Colosseums and rethought its values, so too must we periodically look at the arenas we've built and ask, what are we really watching? And what are we truly celebrating? The gladiators are no longer with us, but their shadows remain. In documentaries, in museum exhibits, in pop culture, in the metaphors we use when we talk about fighting for survival or being thrown to the lions. They live in our language, our archetypes, and our imaginations. Their story is not a relic. It is a mirror. Even as the empire declined and the sand of the arena settled for the final time, Rome's fascination with strength, spectacle, and sacrifice didn't vanish. It simply evolved. The gladiator, once a living icon of Roman values, became a myth. And myths, unlike people, don't die. They morph, adapt, re-emerge. Long after the last sword was drawn in the Colosseum, artists continued to paint gladiators as icons of masculine virtue. Renaissance scholars studied their gear and footwork, fascinated by the mechanics of ancient combat. European monarchs reimagined gladiator duels in theatre and opera. The Enlightenment questioned their morality. The Victorians romanticized their tragedy. And in modern times, Hollywood turned them into cinematic legends. From the silent films of the 1920s to blockbusters like Gladiator and Spartacus, the image of the lone fighter, defiant, honorable, and brave, has become a global symbol. But each retelling says more about the age in which it's told than the reality of Rome itself. The gladiator is no longer a slave in chains, but a metaphor for struggle, rebellion, grit. We use their story to reflect our own, about what it means to resist, to survive, to become more than what the world expects. This evolution is not accidental. In every era, people have used the figure of the gladiator to process their own contradictions. We live in societies that still crave performance, reward spectacle, and measure worth by public applause. Gladiators remind us that such systems are old, older than we think, and that being admired often comes at the cost of being understood. Today, we still build arenas, not of stone and sand, but of pixels, screens, and algorithms. Influencers battle for attention. Athletes push themselves to extremes under the glare of global media. Political figures are groomed like prize fighters, trained in optics, sound bites, and public combat. And every now and then, a modern gladiator falls, not by sword, but by scandal, burnout, or rejection, revealing again that the appetite for spectacle is eternal and often merciless. But we also live in a time with new tools: empathy, reflection, historical awareness. We can look back not to glorify the bloodshed, but to learn from it. To see that even in a system designed to dehumanize, people found ways to assert their identity, to carve meaning out of suffering, to become unforgettable. Some gladiators won their freedom. Others died young but left behind names etched in stone. A few became folk heroes, like Flammer, who turned down freedom 4 times, choosing instead to remain with his fellow fighters. Or Carpophorus, a beastmaster who could take down wild lions and bears with almost mythic ease. Their feats were real. Their pain was real. And their stories remind us that greatness often comes not from domination, but from endurance. Their memory has outlived empires. That, too, is part of the legacy. Rome fell. Its politics crumbled. Its gods were abandoned. But the image of the gladiator endured. Why? Because we recognized something eternal in them. Something that doesn't belong to Rome alone. They were proof that even the most controlled, oppressed, and commodified individuals could become something larger than life. That even in the most brutal systems, dignity could survive. That spectacle can birth solidarity. That identity, once forged, can leave echoes through centuries. So as we reach the end of this journey, from humble funeral rites to imperial mega-events to global cultural icons, we are left with a strange kind of silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but of deep reflection. We've seen what power looks like when paired with entertainment. We've felt the cost of war. And we've seen how, even now, the lessons of the arena are far from irrelevant. The gladiator has become a symbol of human duality, of beauty and brutality, of fame and exploitation, of hope and loss, of survival and sacrifice. They force us to ask uncomfortable questions about how we consume stories, how we define strength, and how we honor those who came before us, not just as characters in history, but as complex human beings. And maybe that's the final legacy of the gladiator, not just the spectacle, the armor, or the roar of the crowd, but the questions they leave behind. Questions that aren't answered by the end of a match, or the fall of a sword, or the fade out of a film, but that stay with us long after the sand has settled. What systems do we glorify today that may one day be condemned? Who are our modern gladiators? What values do we broadcast through our arenas, physical or digital? And what kind of legacy are we creating now? Rome tried to control the gladiator. It trained him, marketed him, used him, but it never truly owned him, because stories belong to those who carry them forward. And so, we carry theirs, not as mere entertainment, but as memory, not as myth, but as mirror. And in doing so, we remember not just the power of Rome, but the resilience of those who bled beneath its banners. The Roman gladiator was not a myth. He was a man, and like all men, he sought meaning. We owe it to him, and to ourselves, not to forget that.